This is part 2 of creating databases, and we're starting on page 167 of the lab manual, where we'll be talking about working with flat data. This is easily the most important part of this entire process, because most of the time people store their data in flat databases, meaning they've got Excel files with no relationships and their data is highly redundant. So our first job is to examine what we've got in flat data format and then figure out how we can make it meet the rules and requirements of a relational database. A relational database, by definition, separates data into logical groups called tables or entities and stores only descriptors of that entity. So, for example, you only have attributes of a customer in a customer table. You only have attributes of a product in the product table. And through minimal redundancy, that is, key fields that are common to both tables, all information or data can be retrieved. So our first problem is that we have all of our data in a flat file. And so let's click on External Data and go get that flat file. Our flat file is in Excel, so browse to your desktop for your Access folder. And we're going to go look for flattransactions.xlsx and then open. We're going to keep it in a new table and click OK. Our Import Spreadsheet wizard launches, and we can click Next. And we see we've got all this stuff going on. As usual in our import, we're going to ignore it all. We are not going to add a primary key at all. And we're going to call this flat transactions because it's still flat, and click Finish, and we will not save. Let's go ahead and open up flat transactions. Double click. I'm going to collapse the navigation pane just so we have a little bit more room to see everything. You may recall in class that we went through each and every one of these and kind of decided, well, is this data or is it not data? And what we decided was that all of this is data with the exception of the subtotal. The subtotal is a combination of the quantity times the catalog price times 1 minus the discount percent. Therefore, because it is derived from existing data, it's not data itself, but rather information. So we're not going to actually use that column. The other question I asked is there anything in the 60,298 record table that can be used as a primary key? Well, if we went to the Home tab and used the sorting tool, find out that no, this transaction ID is not unique. In other words, it doesn't occur just once in this entire table to identify the entry. Okay. What else we looked at was that for each one of these 15 records that are record number 1 or transaction ID number 1, we have certain things that repeat. So for example, we're redundant on date, we're redundant on location, we're redundant on who bought this transaction or who made this transaction. We're redundant on the employee who dealt with it, but we are not at all redundant on item code, quantity with the corresponding item, the discount percent, the catalog price, And remember, we're ignoring the subtotal. So one of the things that you can remember is this. If you have a singular ID, in other words, the number 1, which is repeated, and everything else after it, at least up until item code, is also repeated, then we can make those conflate and become a single record that would allow us to use the transaction ID as a primary key. In order to do this, what we're going to have to do is use some tools called queries. I'm going to go ahead and close this table. And I'm going to say no on changing that design. I'm going to uncollapse the navigation pane so you can see what's happening. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually pull out bits of data from this so that we can normalize this pile of data. So I'm going to go to Create and then Query Design. Query is simply a way to filter data, ask a question of the database, such as how many people have purchased things online in the last month. That would give us that information. But what we're going to do is we're going to use a query as a way to manipulate the data in a way that we need it to be manipulated. So I'm going to choose Flat Transactions and click Add and then Close. What we've got here is a query design grid, and you'll see a lot more of that in the future. But I do want you to see that from this grid we can pull down any fields that we want. So we're going to limit ourselves to transaction ID. Double click will put it in the grid. I can also use my control key to click multiple fields and pull them down with my mouse. Okay. Click Run, and we still have 60,298 records. So how do we get this to conflate? And I'm going to go ahead and sort this and show you that we still have 15 records that are essentially alike. So what we want to do is we want to use a tool inside of the query design. I'm going to go back to Design View here. And we're going to use a tool called the Totals row. Notice when I click it off and on, I get a different line down in the query design grid. And it comes up with a total row that says group by for each and every one. Essentially, a group by tells Excel that, well, here you go. You've got all these records, but they're exactly alike, so please group by them. So only display them one time because they're all alike. You can see what happens when we run the query, and I just want to take special note to tell you that every time you're doing something that, when you're designing a query, you need to run it because it performs the action specified in a query. This is especially important when you're using queries that we're going to be using today. So click Run, and now you can see that we're down to 4,006 records and only displaying each one of these numbers once. So now everything as far as transaction ID is utterly unique. There is nothing there that is going to be a repeat. So let's go back to Design View. What we're going to do is we're going to create a table out of this subset of data. So go ahead and click in the query type group to make table. We're going to call this TBL transaction. We're going to save it in the current database and click OK. And then to execute the actions we've specified, click Run. It should say you are about to paste 4006 rows into a new table. Once you click Yes, you can undo it. Click Yes. So you should see now that we have a new TBL transaction here. If you double click it to open it, you'll see that there are 4006 records eventually, and we still have our uniqueness going on here. Now, what we've done is we've taken every attribute that is descriptive of the key and placed it in one table. So transaction 1 occurred on December 30th in the Illinois store. Member ID 1187 bought all those things, and then the whole order was taken care of by employee number 283. Number 2 also took place on the 30th, but in the Indiana store with member ID 815 and taken care of by employee 143. So you can see that there were some simultaneous transactions going on here, and each one of these describes uniquely one transaction. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And we're done with that part of it. We've got part of our job taken care of. We've done this by using an action query called make table. And if you click on the design tab here, you'll see that we're still at a make table query. What we want to do here is save this make table query and call it QRY make table TBL transaction. And click OK. And close it. Action queries always have the funny little symbols to the left. They're different icons from when we do a select query. But if you try to run them again, they're going to do the same action. If you double click them, it's going to take you to the same action. So you don't want to have that happen. If you want to design this query again, then you can open it by right-clicking and going to Design View. What we're going to do is be lazy, and we're actually going to take this query and copy it. I'm going to right-click right in that navigation pane and choose Paste. And I'm going to rename this query to be QRY make table transaction underscore detail. And make sure there's no space at the beginning of that. There we go. And click OK.